Okay, so here we are. This is the first breakdown that I'm going to do on this channel. And I think this is probably quite relevant given how many people are seeing this film at the moment. Black Panther, now there's probably hundreds or more reviews out there right now. So what I wanted to do is try, I think at least, to do something a bit different. I've not obviously seen all the reviews, but to really give a scene by scene breakdown. So this is, as you can probably tell by the length of the video, not short. And we're going to try and go into a bit of detail, and then I'm going to plan at least to do a follow-up part 2 where I break down more around the tangible aspects, the real life elements, who's playing who in the cast, and how that affects our wider views of society. So in terms of the breakdown, I mean, all film has a purpose. Every film has a purpose. Whenever a film is put out, the surface meaning of it is always going to be entertainment. But this is why we've got to peel back the layers a little bit. Now, some people out there are going to say it's over analytical, but this video obviously is not necessarily going to be for you. Hopefully you would still listen to it and get more of an understanding and a comprehension of it, but this is really for people that like to pick apart film and find out what the message is, because as someone who's been I've watched plenty of films, but someone who's always historically been skeptical of anything that Disney put out in particular, I was really interested myself, being part of the African diaspora, to find out, right, what angle are these people going to take when they're breaking down a subject that is deeply intrinsically connected with Africa. And I think that's an interesting place to start. Let's just dive straight into the film. So the film is about a fictional place called Wakanda. So I found lots of interesting arguments online about this, and people saying, well, you know, why are black people supporting this film so much, and black in the general sense, the most general sense I could possibly use it. Why are black people supporting this film? It's not even a real place. Wakanda's not a real place. Now the subcontext behind that is that it does represent Africa. Ultimately, it represents Africa in whatever capacity you want it to. It's a nameless country, a nameless element and entity that can, for the purposes of film, represent any country you want to choose. Now, people have made tight links between quote-unquote Wakanda and the Congo, because coltan is mined there, and that's quite, it's essential for mobile devices, which most people, if you live in the West, you cannot deal without a mobile device or without coltan being in one of your products. So that's what Wakanda symbolizes, is Africa. So whenever we're talking about Africa, the subcontext of this film is we are talking about Africa as a whole. This is a way that Western people, for the most part, and I am generalizing, I will continue to generalize throughout this review and breakdown, but as the general perspective, most people look at Africa this particular way, or the Western media is happy to continue to portray Africa in this way, and we'll see this touched upon as we go through it. So we're going to start with a scene-by-scene breakdown. I'll say it, I'm not a big fan of saying it, but spoilers. It's a scene-by-scene breakdown of the film. If you don't care, obviously listen. If not, you might find it a bit more enlightening if you've watched the film once yourself and then come through. I've watched the film twice. I did see it in the cinema. Again, I got mixed feeling about that. And I saw it another time in the cinema, and then I watched it at home and did a bit of a breakdown to take notes of it. So the film opens, and I didn't actually notice this until the third time watching it. It opens with a boy asking a father to tell him about Wakanda, and who this actually is, who I realised it was after the third listen, is Killmonger, Eric Killmonger, the main protagonist throughout the film, talking to his father about Wakanda. And this is his father's opportunity. You'll see as the film goes on, but he is in America. He's a spy sent out by T'Challa, who's the main character in the film's father, has sent him to America to spy on America, essentially, and to really find out about the wider world, the world outside of Wakanda, because they keep a tight-knit community. So this father is explaining to his son, who has never been to Wakanda, what Wakanda is, and the importance of Wakanda and Wakanda's history. So that immediately, to me, gives me the perspective that they're trying to highlight. This is, again, I'll make no bones about it, it's an American film. It's made by an American studio, and again, I know there's been a ton of debate online, and this will be covered partly in this video, definitely in the second video, about who the actors are they not an all-American cast, does it even make it a black movie, which is really interesting to me, like what does that mean by definition, a black movie? But yeah, in terms of the cast, they're from all over. But the film starts from an American perspective. It starts from Killmonger, who is an American protagonist throughout this whole film, who many American people who are from various backgrounds are associating themselves with, and really feel that he represents them, which I can see why. I really do empathise with him. We'll get into it as well. But he's asking his dad to tell me about Wakanda. So you've got the story about Wakanda, 5 tribes in constant tribal war. So again, straight off the bat, we've got this perspective that is put out by the Western media again. However subtle the context and however subtle it's interwoven in there, is that there's always going to be tribal war. There's always tribal war going on between African nations, Wakanda being representative of Africa as a whole, and they're only subjugated by one person having a technological dominance over them. So this again is implied that this is just the way things are in Africa. Whenever there's tribes at war, one will take over. It's never going to be a scenario where we come to a mutual agreement through some other means. It's going to be tribal warfare until one person is dominated. And then of course you've got another faction even within that, Jabari, the mountain tribe, who then go off and live rurally because, even within tribal warfare, even though 3 of the other tribes have been submitted, or 4 of the tribes, if you include the river tribe as well, are all subjugated, you've still got one that goes off and lives in the mountain. So even within that, there's not a complete unity. And then the story begins to progress, various imagery shown in there, but as it's showing time passing around Wakanda in this opening scene, then goes on to say that Wakanda didn't help the lands around it. It forgot the world around them, essentially, to protect this element that landed on their society, vibranium. So to protect this, to protect their technology, they would rather not go out and help. And now, this is obviously a key part of the whole film anyway, but what I found particularly interesting is as it zooms out, again, film is all about imagery. It's, as much as it's about the sound and the message that you're being communicated via the film, language and music, it's definitely about the imagery as well. And one of the first key images that really stuck out, above and beyond the tanks and the warring that you see a little bit further, is people clearly being led onto a slave ship. So however fleeting that image is, you've got this image again in your head of Africans being taken on a slave ship, and this particular tribe of Wakandans just being there and not wanting to help them because they're protecting this particular resource that they're trying to keep hold of. Which this is a narrative that's constantly pushed out there anyway, and something which essentially causes a lot of friction between the American nation, and people within Africa. This is a constant debate within the Pan-African movements, and to give my overall perspective, even before we give more of a breakdown to some of the other scenes in here, this whole film is very calculated. It's extremely calculated, and it's a very accurate shot on target against causing dissension between groups that could otherwise find some level ground and find some level of unity. And two of the key groups that I think are being targeted, one is the quote-unquote African Americans, and I think that's indicated by the fact that the very perspective that the film is from, above and beyond it being an American film, shot by predominantly American people, filmed predominantly in America and funded by Americans, is the fact that the film starts off with an American, Killmonger, the boy, asking his dad, tell me about Wakanda, to get a breakdown. So we start from this perspective before we even start talking about T'Challa and the wider story of it. So, yeah, I just find it interesting that small subliminal message in there that, okay, so these slaves are being taken away, which again is always going to be a relevant subject. If you're an African American, slavery is always going to be a relevant subject for you, at least for the next couple of 100 years anyway. But that is put in there that these Wakandans, the main tribe that represents Africa as a whole, would rather protect their resources than get involved in outside strife. So this is where the film begins. After that, we cut again, which perspective we starting from, to 1992 in LA, and we start again with Killmonger as a boy. So we continue in this story of talking from the perspective of this protagonist throughout the film. And many people are saying that this protagonist is one of the strongest Marvel villains, and I think you can easily see why. They've tried to make it this way. They've tried to humanize him in lots of different ways, and again we see that from the fact that the film, at least to begin with, is surrounded with his backstory, which you don't find out until further down the line, but it just shows the perspective that it's really from. So it shows Killmonger as a boy. We see two men up in the room debating tactical action against the police, etc. And then long and the short is the king of Wakanda at that point in time turns up. He arrives. Now, what I found really interesting is the king is meeting his brother. These are two men who should be meeting each other on a level field. And what he's actually done, the king has undermined his own brother by planting a spy there to watch him, which again just shows the kind of tumultuous relationship that we've come to accept from African communities as a whole. We just agree that we're always trying to watch each other and spy on one another, forgetting that these aren't really concepts that were prominent, not as prominent as they are. I mean, we live in the West. Most people live in the... I imagine most people that watch this film and potentially are watching this review, you're living in the West where there are cameras every single way, all over the place. I live in Britain, which has got the highest number of cameras per square footage than anywhere else on the planet. So I definitely understand being spied upon. But again, we've got this subcontext there that the king of Wakanda is so insecure in his brother that he had to plant a spy with him, and the spy actually turns out to be right, because if he didn't put this spy, James, who turns out further down the line to be his medicine man, if he didn't plant him there, he wouldn't have found out that his brother actually betrayed him, and allowed Claw, the main villain, another supporting villain I should say throughout the film, to come into Wakanda and steal resources from there. So again, we've got this story playing out once and once again, that there's even internal conflict in the royal family. These are brothers and they can't even get along. Again, what I found interesting is these methods. It's not, from my experience with people from the continent of Africa. I'm married to an African lady. I have got friends who are African. They are, for the most part, I've found to be very direct people. So these techniques that we see put in here, where the king knows that his brother is lying but doesn't say anything, he just lets him lie basically, and then entraps him by saying, haha, actually we've got a spy who's been watching you the whole back. Even the way it's been written, of course it's from an individual perspective, and again, this is where I'm sure some people would say, oh, it's just a film, but these small threads of deceit just throw a completely different light on the character and how they're trying to portray him as a character. Kings are historically normally looked at as honourable people, but in this scenario he turns up not just with a domineering force, he's got 2 bodyguards with him, but then he accuses his brother of lying, which he's right in doing, and he's also had a spy with him the whole time, so he knows he's lying. And then he says he's going to take him a prisoner to be convicted in front of the council. So that scene cuts out, and again it cuts out with Killmonger as a boy. We're not sure at this point in time if it's your first watch through, but on a second or third watch, Killmonger's looking up, watching his this spaceship take off and go away. So that's his impression. So we cut from this scene. So again, the first 2 scenes have all been from an American-centered perspective, all been from the villain's perspective. We've got the scene of the spaceship driving. and we've got BBC in the background playing out the incident around, this is in modern day, the death of King T'Chaka, which is T'Challa's father. And now this is shown in the previous film, Marvel film, Captain America film, I think it was. But it's showing it from a BBC perspective, and again, constantly reinforcing that even these African people who are part of the royal lineage, the royal family, they used to have the top technology, but what are they watching? They're watching BBC News. You know, that's where they still get their news from, of course. Why would they get it from anywhere else? Why would they get it from a local source or even their direct own news channels? They could be watching their own coverage of it, but no, here we're still watching BBC. We're still deferring to this Western outlet of media to really get our information, to get our credibility from. And through this BBC setup, it goes on to say, Wakanda is a third world country with no trade. Again, going on the basis that Wakanda is representative of Africa as a whole, it's hammering home this constant message that we give that Africa is a third world country. I for one am kind of sick of hearing the same rhetoric time and time again. But we'll come back to that at a later point anyway. So this is the image that it opens up on again, and essentially we've got now the Boko Haram scene. That's essentially what we're dealing with. It starts off in Nigeria for one, and Black Panther T'Chaka drops out of the spaceship to try and save this spy lady, Lupita Nyong'o, who plays Nikita throughout the film. So he's there to try and save her. Now, interestingly enough, you'll see T'Challa character, although he's a king and he's the main protagonist throughout the film, he's not actually a very strong character. He's not in terms of the decisions. Obviously, he's got these powers, but you don't really see them play out. He always seems to be a disadvantage in somehow. So the general says to him, even before he goes, don't freeze. Again, cool line, drops out the sky, has this fight, and inevitably gets to the point where he's taken out all these other warriors. But he does freeze. There's a point where she corrects him, so you did freeze, And what I find really interesting here is he's not doing anything other than inadvertently stopping Boko Haram. He's not going out of his way. Again, we know Boko Haram was quite a big story. These girls were kidnapped, and it's a very real story and very painful story for hundreds and thousands of people, if not tens of thousands of people when the story occurred. But again, we've got this image of he just inadvertently saves these girls. He wasn't going out of his way to do it. He just happened to do it because one of his spies, who he needed to invite back for his ceremony, it wasn't even for his father's funeral. It wasn't for any major reason. It's like, I just want you to see me become the king that I'm meant to be. And he inadvertently saves these other girls from their terrible fate that they would have had otherwise, just because he wants to save this spy. So we still got this flippant perspective of Wakanda as a nation. They don't really want to help other people around him. And this is what I feel was the spirit of the film that's trying to be portrayed to people who are in the Western audience. We are supposed to essentially think that Africa doesn't care about anybody other than Africans, which I believe to be wholeheartedly false. And again, I'm sure we'll touch on again. Now, not to mention actually, when he is helping his spy girlfriend out, his ex-girlfriend, he kills a lot of guys, right? And he would have killed the little boy. He would have killed a boy, like a teenage boy at the end, if she didn't step in and say, "Oh no, don't kill him. He's just a boy." He would have killed him too. So we're not really talking about a character really that we should be putting on a pedestal. Again, I know it's a film, but we're talking about African on African violence, and this is just flippant violence. There's not really a rationale behind why he's killing these guys off, other than my girlfriend's here and I want to chat to her. It's just a really flippant reason. And the people that are left there, the girls that are left there are kind of treated quite harshly. They're like, don't say anything. The general steps up after saving his backside and then saying, yeah, you did freeze, haha. Again, undermining him as a very character from the offset. But then she turns around to these girls that have been through a really traumatic experience, right? And just traumatizes them a bit further. It just says, don't say anything to anyone. Like, what are they really going to say anyway? But says, don't say anything to anyone. They kind of smile about it. But again, we're left with this image of, if you're not not from Wakanda, if you're not from this central hub of elite power, and you're in Nigeria, which is a really technologically savvy country today, right now, and has historically got a very strong lineage and history there, they're still being perceived and highlighted as savages. This is the image that we're left with. A bunch of girls who are left in the forest with this one boy who 2 minutes ago was keeping them enslaved, which are all huddled around now, right? And they watch the spaceship take off, and they're just left there. So again, great. They've really saved them. So that's that. The scene, and then it transitions over into their arrival into Wakanda. You've got these wide sweeping shots, which I was really interested about. I thought, okay, so where in Africa was that shot? And I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure when I looked into it, I couldn't see that they shot in Africa at all. Predominantly shot in Atlanta when they did a lot of their set pieces. And I know they did some secondary shooting in South Korea, interestingly enough, where they have just had the Winter Games. So I don't know why they're pumping money into South Korea, but there should be a good reason. But not Africa, which I found really interested in. But when they get into Wakanda anyway, so you see a lot of the peasants essentially, or just the normal people walking along. You show people riding along, and again you still got this quite primitive image of them until they go through the veil of the jungle again, which is always interesting that Africa is portrayed as having this complete jungle, and it's predominantly grassland anyway, but they fly into this jungle, and again, the first perspective that we've got, this is supposed to be a central hub of technology within Africa, and within this place is, it looks like a Western city, okay? Now, I am nitpicking, and this is the whole idea of this breakdown, is not to let anything slip, not to let anything slide. And I'm sure even now I'll probably skip a bit here or there, but it looks like a Western city. There's plenty of cities that you can draw from for inspiration of original history. You know, we're talking about a culture that's supposed to be isolated and that much more technologically advanced than the rest of the Western world. But what do we get? Our first perspective, our first view of Wakanda, yeah, there are some certain technological advances, but really it just essentially looks like any other Western city. So again, to me, a very subliminal hint at the fact of, okay, so this is the most advanced place within the whole of Africa, and yeah, it just looks like one of our regular cities. That was my perspective. So again, on arrival, they land, and we've got this first initial interaction. Now, again, I find really interesting, other supporting men throughout this film are not really there. Now, I know there's been a lot of praise for the film of showing strong female characters, which, why would you not? If you're showing females are inherently strong. So I don't think we have to go, or shouldn't have to go out of our way to show, right, these are strong female characters or these are strong male characters. It just is what it is. You're a male, you're a female, and you're blessed with what you're blessed with. But there's not really many strong male characters for him to bounce off. I found this really interesting. If you're a young boy in the cinema watching this film and you're identifying yourself as the main character, right? If you're identifying yourself as one of the main characters, either Black Panther or Killmonger, as we'll get onto, if you're identifying as Black Panther, you don't really have any other support. The other supporting characters you've got throughout the film pretty much undermine you and backstab you throughout the whole film. So what I found interesting is this first arrival back, he's basically chastised by these three ladies. His, not so much his mum, but the general and her sister kind of make a joke about him, and she says, did he freeze? Makes this hark back to the joke before, like an antelope in headlights. A bit of a cheap line for me personally. I might again be nitpicking, but whatever. But again, it's this undermining, kind of picking away at his character. Like, okay, he's not really shown as much respect for someone. If he is a king, and I get these are his closest inner circle, but if he is a king, maybe a little bit more respect. He's not necessarily treated like royalty at any point during the film. Not really. He's not. So his sister then makes a joke of teaching him. Haven't I taught you anything? He's kind of seen as, again, a bit backwards. Now, T'Challa throughout the film represents the traditional African. Okay, the same way Wakanda represents Africa, T'Challa represents that traditional African who is aware of their background, they're aware of their heritage, they're aware of lots of different things. They may have had certain privileges throughout life, Like, he is meant to be representative of that normal African, and it's strange for people that aren't familiar with their background. But the normal African that, let's say, grows up in Nigeria from a middle class or upper middle class family, and then gets sent over to either America or England or France, wherever the case may be, to get your education. This is quite a prominent thing within the African community. It's not really stuff that you see on TV. You just meet these people. We don't see, there's a high number of Nigerians coming over to go to Cambridge. You don't hear about it on the news. You just meet people from there. So that's who he represents throughout the film. He represents this modern African male who is not this other extreme image, which we also see portrayed in the film through another character, of this hyper masculine version of the African male, which we're normally bombarded with from every angle. He is the more quote unquote reformed African, in the sense that he's aware of Western culture. He's also aware of his culture, but overall throughout the film plays quite a passive part. And again, this is just reiterated time and time again. One part being when his sister tells him that she's teaching him, and then when she walks off, she swears at him. She flips him off, basically. Now, what I find interesting is how his mum still kind of just reassured the kingship. They did speak about the loss of his father, which was only really touched upon, which is interesting, but I just find that they kind of skipped over his dad passing away way too quickly. His mum didn't really even seem that bothered. She just wanted to talk about his kingship. So that's the first scene. Not a huge amount of character development for him as an individual. Really, all we've got is him trying to save his girlfriend. His girlfriend did just as much of a job as saving herself, ultimately having his backside saved by his general, and then being undermined by his sister and his general and his mum. So this is the character development we've got in his plot. Conversely, the next scene we've got is of Killmonger, and he's a character who throughout the film gets the most character progression. He gets the most development, and really I think it's reflective of the general public's perspective of the film as a whole. The film really is about Killmonger. For the most part, it's at least 50-50, if not more, leaning towards it, the film really being about Killmonger. I'm sure if they released a spin-off, like a prequel of just Killmonger, that film would do fantastically right now, especially given the market, and I wouldn't be surprised if they do it. But we cut to the scene of Killmonger. Now, Killmonger, I've just gone into who T'Challa represents. Killmonger essentially represents that character that people can identify with, and predominantly within African American society, because this is who the market is for. This is the target audience. It represents a strong African American male. It represents an African American male who is aware of their culture, which we see in this first scene. He's in the British Museum in the Western African exhibit, and he's aware of where these pieces are from. He knows just as much as the woman who comes and tries to explain to him, this is the mask from Benin. He's aware of his history as well. So he represents that movement within America, this growing movement of young men who are have always been intelligent, but they're not just intelligent, but are empowered. They're empowered through the liberties that have been afforded them through civil rights. They're empowered by liberties that have been afforded to them via the fact that they've got access to social media and can get their opinions out there. He's representative of all of these things, and I'm sure if you are an African American or even American, you might say, you're talking out of turn because you're clearly British. You're not. How can you claim to understand? I'm just claiming to understand the film. And I empathize with aspects of the African American struggle, but this is who the film is trying to set you up to accept. Essentially, if you're an African American male listening to this is who the film is setting you up to accept. Killmonger. And this is why most people have identified with his character in America, because he represents strength, he represents masculinity, he represents a will to go above and beyond for the overall principle of taking back something that was theirs. And that these are all sentiments that, while I empathize with in the African American struggle and development and their progression overall as not just individuals but as a people and a collective, I can't say that I would ever want to accept a hero that the people that impose these very restrictions on me have given me. You know, again, this is predominantly a white film. Say what you want about the cast. This film is as black as 12 Years a Slave. This film is as black as any other film that is contained as Django Unchained. Films that have got prominent aspects of Glory, for example, Denzel Washington. Films that have got predominantly African American or black by skin cast. It doesn't make it a black film. It really doesn't. There are plenty of black films out there that are completely, if that's what you're looking for, if that's really what you're looking for, written by black people, directed by black people. And I know this was for the most part directed and written by black people, but then filmed on location on somewhere of predominant blackness, which most people, at least currently, will accept as somewhere around the equator, Africa, Brazil, countries like this. This film wasn't even shot there. So how people are trying to highlight this as a black film, to me, doesn't really hold water. On some notes, yes, but on lots of other notes, it's the same as any other film. I would probably classify Malcolm X as more of a black film than this film. That's my personal perspective. But anyway, let's get back to Killmonger. So Killmonger, we've got here with the classic white British lady and the security guard, and he's educating her, which I found, again, really interesting. And what I found most subtle about this initial part is the way that she drinks the coffee and we have her falling out. Him leaning into her and saying, look, you checked everybody that came in here, but you're not checking what you put in your body. Now, throughout the quote-unquote conscious community at the moment, there's a huge push, and rightfully so, on watching what we put in our body. But I just find it interesting that amount of subtlety has been put into the plot and the script, that you will really identify. If I could really see it, if I were to put myself in the shoes of somebody who's my age, you know, I'm 30, I'm middle age, young and strong with a family. Like if I was living in America, that would really resonate with me. And more as this character develops, it just hits all those notes that would make somebody say, I really want to identify with him as a character. But anyway, leans into us, says, you're checking everything, you're not even checking what you put in your body. She falls to the ground and the robbery begins to get staged, again supported by a black female, which is again is to make us feel comfortable. This is essentially what it's to do. It's to not challenge like any of our norms. We have to be lulled into a sense of comfortability throughout the film to accept the message that it's really given us. So the robbery is staged. Killmonger and Claw, who's the other villain or sub-villain in it, played by Andy Serkis, who is an English guy but playing a South African. Again, most people wouldn't bat an eyelid at a South African getting beat up or tortured, because I think even white people outside of Africa have this perception of South Africans of just they're particularly brutal, and really associate them with some of the crimes that were committed by their forefathers, and to a degree, and quite literally a degree, today they are still perpetrating a lot of acts of atrocities. But let's not go down that route right now. But so they kill the guards quite callously. Don't really think anything of it. And again, find it interesting that he picks up the African mask and he says, "Oh, is it made out of vibranium?" No, I'm just feeling it. Again, all lends to this fact of he identifies with Africa. He identifies with the bits of Africa that he wants to as a character, and we're finding out more about this villain. First time we're watching it, we're thinking this is the first time really we've been introduced to Killmonger, but after you've watched the film once, you realise that the very beginning of the film starts already with him, and we're already on his journey from the very off. But they make their escape. Next, we cut to the scene of the ceremony. So this is the ceremony of T'Challa taking his kingship now. We've got them coming down the river scene. Now, this in particular, I found cinematographically, in terms of cinematography, was one of the nicer set out scenes. I really enjoyed it, and if I were to praise the film on any aspect, and there are certain aspects that I would highlight as that was particularly good, some of the acting in certain scenes, the sound, the music, but the costume design in particular, I wasn't really that fussed on the sets themselves, but the costume design was intricate enough. Do I think it's really representative of what's a shame in that, even in the compliment, I have to be clear, is that it just combines every hot thing about oh, this is African. And it really just gives us this impression that we can condense every part of Africa down into this one 5-tribe setup, and all Africans would probably fit into these tribes. So just don't. That's just as false. There's thousands of tribes in Africa that have got their own dialect, own way of living, and you can't really ever condense that down to 5 tribes. I get, for a purpose of film, sometimes you have to, but again, just really sows this seed of Africa is just this one big rock, and they've got stuff and they've got tradition, but that's it. So we've got the scene of them coming down the river, dancing. They still have got quite an elite system, I've found as well. Like, for all of the people that live in Wakanda, you've got the scenes in the town centre. None of those people are there. You've still only got a few hundred people there, so you've still got an elitist kind of setup there anyway. Black Panther has his strength taken away from him, so we've got like the herb context of the purple heart herb being there, and then at this point in time we've got the 4 different tribes set up to have an option to have a challenge. So you've got the merchant tribe, the border tribe, the river tribe, and one of the other ones, and none of the tribes will challenge. Again, we get some development from the sister's character, who's Shuri. She again kind of is just flippant of the whole tradition aspect of things, and let me kind of touch upon her as we go through. We'll touch upon the different characters and who I feel they represent as we go through, but Shuri is really representative of, if you were somebody going into the cinema to watch this film for the first time, you will find different characters to identify with, or most people will inherently just do that as part of film anyway. So I feel that with Shuri, the person who is most identifying with this is going to be a young African American or a young African woman who is maybe quite academically gifted, or maybe they are quite savvy with technology, but just very similar to this character. You know, maybe they do have older brothers like like Shuri does have in this film, who's quite tradition based, and maybe they let the side down a little bit here and there, which again Black Panther does time and time throughout the film, is let different people down, but she is constantly representative of somebody who wants to push for change and wants to get rid of tradition, and yeah, certain traditions must be scrapped, I think, and you always have to find a way to be looking for the truth, to find the truth, and to try and eradicate parts of culture that shouldn't necessarily be there. But equally, tradition is what makes us who we are, and something that we have to hold on to. So the fact that this is the message that is being portrayed throughout the film is, if you identify with this young girl, you may come away from the cinema kind of feeling quite similar, which is, forget tradition, my family are quite traditional. That subcontext is put in there. Whoever you identify with throughout the film, you'll come out the other side. You may well be coming out the other side with some of their perspectives imprinted upon you, unless you are really conscious and vigilant about being aware of what goes into your brain and what absorbs into your personality. But again, we've got her kind of flippant refusal of tradition and just saying, so do we really need to do this? This is awkward. Then after that, we've got the white gorilla tribe, the Jabari. You've got Mbako coming through, and he decides he's going to challenge. Now, what I found really interesting, and I know the Black Panther as a comic book, I'm pretty sure it's been around for best part of 40 years. So it's been around a while, maybe even longer than that, probably closer to 50 years actually. So it's been around for a while, and Mbako isn't a particularly new character, but what I always find interesting is people's constant association between Africa and apes and gorillas. And I mean, this is obviously a wider topic and a wider subject, and I may do a video on this separately, but the fact he's a white gorilla, come on, is a gorilla. They just had to make him white, basically. So if he was a black gorilla, it probably would have been too much of a controversial issue, but you make him a white gorilla, and okay, it's fine, he's white anyway. But that was just an interesting sub note that I've always found about, even from the comics right through to the representation on screen. But you've got the most physically strong tribe. The Jabari are associated with being this gorilla tribe that live up in the middle of nowhere. Anyway, they make their entrance, and they embody, for the most part, M'Baku really embodies all of these tribal elements. So again, talking about who people represent throughout the film, M'Baku, I feel, really represents, if you're a young African male going into the cinema, or even African American, but definitely a young, these are the two markets that the film is catering for, African Americans and Africans. So pick a side, whoever you are listening to this, and then just the rest, the rest of the people like me. But yeah, if you're a young African male going into the cinema, and you really appreciate things that are traditional about your culture, you want to hold on to them, things that represent strength, and these are all the points that M'Baku essentially attacks T'Challa on. He says, you're weak. He says, your sister mocks tradition. He said, you couldn't even protect your father. And during the fight that they proceed to have, he calls him a boy. So it just shows this kind of reproach that this one African male has for this other African male. Again, going back to what I said earlier about T'Challa, he really doesn't have really positive relationships with other men that he should have throughout the film. He doesn't have any real peers that are completely honest and transparent with him, and vice versa. He doesn't really have a positive relationship with any other male throughout the film. So yeah, this is a film, a fight that then takes place between M'Baku and T'Challa. T'Challa wins, and essentially this tribal warrior, who was huge in real life and in the film, he's defeated by this more diplomatic prince type. Despite the fact that he sustains, Black Panther T'Challa sustains a really strong wound throughout this, he still manages to beat him, and overpowering this traditional warrior essentially with MMA. That's what he takes him out with. He gets him in a headlock, which is, the first time I watched it, I think I kind of just accepted it. The second time I watched it, I was like, that's a bit silly really. And the third time it was just ridiculous. Like he took out a warrior with an MMA technique and got him to tap, basically. So yeah, read in between the lines that what you will, that somehow this modern MMA, which is a fantastically difficult sport, and respect to those people in their own right, but is far more superior. This is, again, the subcontext, far more superior than what this traditional strong warrior could bring through. Now, he's awarded his kingship, and again imprints this perspective, Wakanda forever. Now, again, the subcontext of Wakanda being representative of Africa, I think this is why Wakanda Forever is the slogan, is like Africa Forever. And that could be taken in a really positive light, but also I think it could be taken in the light of that Africans are just for themselves. I know this to not be true personally, from personal perspective of the interactions that I've had over the last 15 years. And again, I am generalizing. There may be, and there always are, people out there that hold different perspectives. But for the most part, although they recognize Africa is for them, African people have always been about sharing and continue to be. This new perspective that they haven't and don't want to share is just preposterous, especially considering that the entirety of the Western economy and even Eastern economy is really based on resources that are mined out of Africa. For the most part, a lot of them are given, if not at a very preferential rate, at next to nothing. So if you really want to talk about sharing, without a doubt, has time and time again come up as the cradle of civilization, not from a man being born there perspective, but from a very real, tangible resources perspective. So yeah, the Wakanda Forever thing is just really, to me, highlighting the fact that he's just thinking that Africa is for the Africans. This is the subcontext put in there, but if you're an African American watching this, and we'll get into it from Killmonger's perspective, that's not a positive thing. That's not a positive thing at all. After that, we've got the ceremonial burial scene, which I found really interesting. I love again, from a technical standpoint, love the colour palette that was used in there, with the purples and the reds, etc. But similar to what they would do to the Magi, actually, in Egypt, is that they would give them a particular potion, concoction, and then they would bury them for a few days, and they were supposed to come out the other side of this experience part telepathic and with all sorts of skills, but one of them would be out of body experiences, which is essentially what we see happening here. T'Challa goes into the spiritual plane, which is supposed to be representative of a heaven, because it's got the red and the blue in the world before he gets buried, and then he turns into this purple spiritual plane. But again, we see a really interesting dynamic between this king. He's the king. He's the king at this point, which is like crazy how weak he is as a king throughout the film. But he's a king, and I'm not saying a man can't cry. I think a man should cry, especially when he's emotionally vulnerable and to the right person. But the first thing he does is cry to his dad, and is rebuked by his dad, essentially, who speaks quite formally in Wakandan. They just talk then at that point in time about, okay, so right, what's going on? What are you doing? And what I found really interesting is they speak in English for the more personal side of the conversation. When he talks about his confession about not feeling that he's up to the job, and how he misses his dad, he's all of this is then done in English, which again, to me, if I was an African watching this, which I am by some kind of gene pool, but not directly, if I was an African watching this, I would feel like, okay, to have this personal conversation, I can't have it in this more formal African language, my traditional language. I'm going to use the emotional language, the more emotional language of English. Very, very small nugget in there, but I think that definitely was put in there for a reason. And then finally finishes off with, it's hard for a good man to be king. Yeah, I can't say I 100% disagree with that statement, but I think if we're talking about a really positive thing, I would never say that to my children. I would never say it's hard to be a good man. I would always encourage them to be as good as they possibly can, throughout their connection with God, first and foremost, but definitely I would encourage them to be good people, just based on the words that I would preside over them. I would never tell my son, okay, it's difficult to be a king and a good man, which, again, we're looking at the audience, people who are in the film watching this. If you're in the film watching it as a child, and that's the message that you're hearing, I don't think that's really a positive message to any community, whether you're from the melanated community or otherwise. I don't think that's a positive message, really. So we then have him coming out of the vision, and just being happy, talking to the herbal guy, Zuri is a name, played by Forrest Whitaker, just being happy to have seen his father. We then cut to the next scene, where we see Wakanda, and this is supposed to be technology, right? This is supposed to be the height of technology, but essentially what do we get? We get a bit of African fashion. I did see a scene in there as well, believe it or not, right? We saw a scene of barbecued chicken. Okay. Now, I'm just saying, we're just seeing barbecue chicken in a film that is predominantly catering to an African American audience or African audience. Again, take that away what you will. I mean, what I found really interesting actually the other day is I saw that there was a university in New York, I think it was, that were serving collard greens and fried chicken and melon juice as part of African American Day in the school. So take from that what you will, but like that subcontext is still there, and for that to kind of flash up like, oh yeah, you're the height of technology and you're still eating fried chicken basically. But yeah, so I found that interesting. But it's not that technologically advanced. But basically, these guys are just using it for really flippant things. Like they're using it to have their mobiles on there and see people dancing on their mobiles, and it's just like rubbish stuff. Which again gives this perspective that these Wakandans are letting people around them die, right, for their technology, and they're not really doing much with it. They're just using it for rubbish stuff. It's like having all the power in the world and you use that to make sure that you can floss without using your hands, rather than trying to help people around you. And this has gotten into, what I find interesting is this scene and the next scene that will come on to are essentially linked. We're looking at one conversation but just read from two different perspectives. So again, we got this weak king playing out again. He's begging for his ex to stay. So he's begging for her to stay, and she doesn't really care. If you're an African lady, or again an African American lady, and you're looking for your character to subscribe to, if you're not the technologically advanced one that might identify with Shuri, I think the other one that they're trying to push to identify with is Nikita. So again, she's represented throughout the film as being an independent, quite a strong woman who wants to overthrow the traditional, very similar to Shuri. So I think this message is really being pushed for the younger female audience. It's like, get rid of tradition. I can't say I wholly agree with that. I really can't. I think tradition is partly what really keeps a culture and a society alive for a number of different reasons. But this really seems to be a message that I see being pushed quite strongly. And we see this represented again in her dialogue with T'Challa. So she says to him, she's seen more. You know, she's basically been out in the world. I've seen the difficulty that people are going through. And this echoes essentially the first scene, the first things that were said by T'Challa's uncle, who was in the first scene with his father, who says, you know, I've seen what happens here. I've seen that the population here are over policed. He's seen the difficulty that they've gone through. You know, it harkens back to that. And that is the message that we see pushed again throughout the film. She says she's been out there, she's seen what is actually going out, and people have nothing. These people have nothing. That's what she says, which takes us back to these Nigerian girls in the forest again who have nothing. Nigeria is a very, very developed country. Not that you need me to say that, but suffice it to say that they're developed in their own right. And she then goes on to suggest sharing aid, technology, and opening up to refugees. Now this is a very Western tactic. Again, a completely different video is necessary on aid and who it really benefits. There are a handful of people who it tangibly will benefit at grassroots level, but it helps a lot of other people who don't benefit directly in sense of accepting food or direct aid before it ever gets to that person. So there are a number of reasons why I as an individual don't think aid is a long-term sustainable system. But again, this is just reinforced that that's the only way of solving problems. You know, this is the only way of solving problems. And even if you're culturally from an African perspective, and this is the cutting edge of Africa here, you're still dealing with African problems or problems full stop, whether it's in Africa or anywhere else on the globe. You're always going to be dealing with them from this Western perspective, which is a patch-up problem. Give them technology, give them some aid, and let in the refugees. This kind of three-string foreign policy that we see from England and lots of other countries. This is what we do. We just dump aid on them and that's it. Like, that's a very Western perspective. So that's another thing we have to be aware of. We're in the West. As I said, for the most part, everyone listening to this will be in the West. People that have watched the film are in the West. But it doesn't mean we have to think like a Westerner. We don't have to accept these Western principles. And especially if you are a Pan-African, I myself would identify with lots of aspects of Pan-Africanism, and my long-term interest will always be to move to Africa, but I don't think that we can take this Western mindset back. So I just find it really disturbing to watch a film and see that this mindset is quite perpetrated throughout the film, and it's being sown in there. And we've got T'Challa again sitting on the fence, just being this fence-sitting character, who is a weak king. I'll keep saying that, like, throughout the review. He's a very weak character. He's actually quite a weak character on paper. Played really well though by Chadwick Boseman. Like the actor that played him did a really good job of playing him, but he just doesn't hold up as a character on paper, I don't think. But he wants to remain isolated from the rest of the world. And then they have this back and forth joke of saying, you know, oh, you would make it such a good queen if you weren't so stubborn. And she's like, oh, you know, if I wanted to be queen, like, again, what power has this guy actually got? He this woman's already left him, right? And then he doesn't even have the power to get her back as the king. So what power does this guy actually have? I'm not saying he should force her, but his charisma is at like a 0 with her at the moment. So that's the first part of the scene, which I feel that the conversation continues over into the next scene, where we hear the other perspective, right? So if Lupita Nyong'o, Nikita, if she is the perspective of a young African American or a young African woman who wants to overthrow tradition, we've then got the character of M'Baku, who is the border friend of him, who's another close associate. Not M'Baku, Wakabi is the border agent. So M'Baku is the Jabari warrior. Then you've got Wakabi, who's the border warrior. So these are two African males who, for all intensive purposes, should be the two characters that Black Panther T'Challa is identifying with the most. They're from the closest background. They share most similarities, but you'll see the internal conflict that goes on between these people. So this continues the dialogue over. They're having a conversation next to the rhino pen where they're feeding the rhino, and he just continues this conversation that he was having with Nikita a moment ago, and says, if you'd have the refugees here, he highlights a conversation that's been had with her. The answer he gets back from Wakabi is, if you have half the refugees in here, we'd lose our way of life. Now, again, script-wise, I find this really interesting because this is like a common thing that we hear over here in the West, and partly the reason why in England at the moment we've got this huge thing around Brexit is we've got this thing of we'd lose our way of life, we'd lose our identity. This is the thing that we would lose, like we're that culturally strong in the first place, but we'd lose this if we let refugees in. This is the argument that's being pushed, right? And it's just interesting to hear this again out of the mouth of somebody who supposedly is supposed to be at the cutting edge of technology, and from a cultural background which is much different from the Western perspective. We're still hearing capitalist mindsets come out of these characters' mouths, but why else could it be written in any other way? Who knows? But what I found really interesting is he then says, oh no, we couldn't have the refugees to come in, but I would be happy. You've got this really bloodthirsty character. Essentially, I would be happy to go out and do the cleanup operation in quite a sinister way. That's the way I take it anyway. He's happy to go out there and basically do wet ops. He's happy to go out there and work as a CIA agent, basically. Similarly to Killmonger's character, which we'll get onto how these two characters, Wakabi and Killmonger, how they get on so well in the film because their personalities are essentially the same. He's happy to go out there and do a cleanup operation, to which T'Challa says, that's not our way. So again, I'm not saying that the option that was being presented to him by Wakabi was a good one, but just shows this weak character. Again, he doesn't agree with his ex that they should let people in, and he doesn't believe that they should go out and do anything about it. So he's just in this really kind of wishy-washy perspective. He's not really making decisions, right? Then this transitions into the call that they have from the general. We see there's a bit of a love triangle, or well, not love triangle, but there's a connection between Wakabi and Okoye, who is the main female general throughout a strong female character throughout the film. So they get a phone call from this lady about Claw, who's the obviously South African criminal, and they have a council meeting, sit down there, and essentially agree that they're going to go and get Claw back for all of his violations against Wakanda. Now, what's interesting is at this point in time, Black Panther T'Challa says, okay, so this is one of my father's biggest regrets, is that he didn't catch Claw. Like, he never managed to catch up with him, which plants the seed of, this guy must be tough, right? He must be difficult to get hold of, or really good at staying off the radar. But he, at this point in time, makes a promise to his friends to say, look, we'll either kill him or I'll bring him back. But he ultimately says, I'll bring him back. He said, look, I need you here to look after the border, but I'll bring him back and we can try him for his crimes. We then cut to the scene of the tech setup. So we see the sister is in control of the tech. It kind of she highlights the ex situation with him again, kind of undermines him, saying, "Oh, you're taking your ex with you." Just shows this dynamic between the two, which plays out great on camera in terms of the two actors. But it just shows like the perspective of her and the dynamic between the two. She doesn't really have a lot of respect for him as a character, but then gives him the comms tech that he needs. This is his sandals. What are those? Again, like it just really kind of steps on everything that can be appreciated. Like holistically, wearing no shoes, right, is better than wearing shoes for your body, just physically, just from if you don't live in a cold country, right, where you're going to get frostbite immediately, but not that. Actually, check out Wim Hof as well, who's the gentleman from, I think he's from Germany, who from a mental analysis allowed himself to walk halfway up Everest in just shorts. So your mind can do it anyway, but you don't really need shoes, basically. You don't really need them from a holistic perspective. People are just used to wearing them, and it is what it is. But Sandals are then dissed as being too traditional, and she's given him a pair of trainers to wear. And you get this joke about them being sneakers, but basically basketball shoes, trainers. That's what they end up looking like, are better than sandals. So we've got this imprint again that if you're an African or an African American, really you should have sneakers, because that's where it's at. Like, not that African Americans don't really spend too much on basketball trainers. The Jordans are like, what, 120, and people line up for days to get them. People get killed from it. It's nuts, but it is what it is. But yeah, then moves on to the suit. Said his old design is rubbish. Microchips connects with him so he can control his suit. And then when T'Challa tries to attack the suit and kind of kicks him, she said, "Oh, you stupid!" Kicks it. She films him making a fool of himself. So again, like, he's not really stacking up as a great hero. I know this may sound like I'm going to be attacking him predominantly, but like, it just doesn't look great anyway. So he gets knocked down, filmed by his sister, and then we cut to the scene in North Korea. Now, I want to talk a tiny bit about who Okoye represents. So Okoye really represents this more mature lady. So if you're a more mature African American lady, or a more mature African and you're African lady, and you're taking your children to the film, there's someone for everyone to latch onto in this film. But she's someone that represents the dignity that you've come to expect of African ladies as a whole, and she is someone who people can connect with. If you're from that demographic, an older African American or African lady, she's someone who you can appeal to, because she's got morals, and she's strong, and she's really strong within her own perspective as well, in terms of her tradition. But this is where this is played out a little bit more. She's got this wig on her head at the start of the scene in South Korea, and she kind of disses the hair. So it's got this ridiculous thing off my head, which does look ridiculous, and if you've got a weave on your head, it does look ridiculous. I'll just say that if you're like not already aware, it does look ridiculous. But yeah. Then is complimented by the ex, is complimented by Nikita in the scenario, and says, "Oh no, it looks good." And again, I suppose if you think that the thing on your head makes you look better, then this is the film reassuring you that it does look good, even though for the character perspective it makes sense that she would say this thing looks ridiculous on my head, because it does. But then they go into the casino, stopped for making trouble. I'll address this now because it really does tie in. What I just find interesting is further down the line in the scene, they just let Claw in, right? And I know it's to show the differentiation in between the two characters, but Claw walks in with a whole entourage and loads of weapons and just kind of kisses the South Korean lady on the cheek on the way back. But these guys get stopped. He's the king of a nation, right? And I know he's going undercover at this point, but they just can't walk in. But then this thug can walk in, right? It just shows this whole white supremacy aspect of, I suppose, not just of Hollywood, but just everything that's associated with a society that's trying to protect itself. It's a defense mechanism to try and protect itself from being cannibalized. So that's one of the things that it does. But yeah, so they go into the casino. They do manage to get in there, and Nikita makes this comment, a kind of innuendo about them sleeping together further down the line. So again, if you're identifying already as this character when you're watching it, these are the kind of character traits that you identify with as an individual, and you just kind of accept because you're already mentally in the same page as this individual from the film. But okay, so let's look at the first real external male positive relationship that Black Panther has in this film, then, because this is the scene when it gets introduced, and this is where I think really the meat of the film begins to play out. Is he makes this comment? He says, "Oh, I've just seen an old friend." So they're locating all of these CIA agents throughout the casino. Okoye notes one of them, Nikita notes a couple of them, and then he says, "Oh, I've just noticed an old friend from the CIA." Right now, I can't think of many other organizations, and I'm sure there are other organizations, but other organizations that are in the public spotlight as much as the CIA, that have done as much damage as the CIA, particularly to African countries and African leaders and African people as a whole. CIA are responsible for countless atrocities to African countries. So it's just interesting to me. This film is about Africa, right? It really is. That's what it's about. It might be told from an African American perspective. It might be bankrolled by Hollywood and predominantly white producers and directors behind the picture, not director of the camera. Ryan Coogler, again, is kind of a rising star in that aspect of things, but it's still ultimately got a very strong message throughout there, and I don't think it would have been able to be bankrolled by these societies that support white supremacy unless ultimately it had that subcontext in there. And this is where I see it really played out, because he has these negative relationships. T'Challa has these negative relationships with other black men in the film. Killmonger, he's meant to be the villain, right? So that's fine. But then he has a negative relationship with Jabari, and then he has a negative relationship with Wakabi, who's meant to be his right-hand man. He has a negative relationship with him as well. It progresses into a negative relationship. So his first friend, who he's actually identified with as a friend throughout the film, is this white CIA agent. That's the person who's really got his back. So he goes over to them and they start having a conversation. Not to mention the fact that this CIA agent is there to buy vibranium from Claw. So if he was really his friend, he wouldn't be doing that. Okay, he just simply wouldn't. They're aware that vibranium has been stolen from Wakanda, and they'd be trying to return it, not trade with this criminal and then try and investigate him. But that's the way CIA operate anyway. But yeah, the Black Panther identity. This is what I found interesting. Their dialogue between the two of them. He says, "You know, I'm aware of who you are." Basically, he says to T'Challa, although they're supposedly friends, he says, "Oh, you know, I know who you really are. You know, I kept that a secret. I didn't tell anyone that you're the king of a third world country running around in a cat suit." That's what he says to him. He said, "I've kind of kept that secret." And then 2 seconds later, when Black Panther walks off from their dialogue and says, "You know, Claw's coming with me," and that's it, and that's how the conversation ends, the CIA agent gets on the phone and says, "The King of Wakanda's here." So he knows that it's just about to go down. He knows that he's going to turn into Black Panther. So he's kept the secret only just to undermine it by telling all the other agents 2 seconds later, "The King of Wakanda's here," knowing that he's then gonna put on the suit eventually and become Black Panther. You know, just find it really interesting that he uses this as a thing to develop their relationship, and actually just throws it out the window 2 seconds later anyway. Then Claw walks in, flouts all the rules, of course, as we touched upon, and gone to the CIA agent to trade the vibranium. Now, what did he actually want to trade it for? Again, we see a kind of part of the true thread in here is the CIA wanting to buy a precious resource for diamonds. So again, throughout the film, we've got them trying to portray that you know, these resources are the things that have got the real power. The diamond and the vibranium. It's not the people. It's these things, and we see it played out by the South African warlord, essentially, or drug runner, in Claw, and the CIA agent that are working together. Interesting subcontext there. But Claw, again, if this is a film that you're really supposed to use as an empowering tool for the melanated community, it's just, there's too many little things like this. So Claw then pulls the vibranium out of his crotch, which is just a little bit childish to me. But then his cover gets blown by, interesting, like the overall cover of the whole operation, and the reason the fight goes down is because this general, who is the top leader and the top warrior in the whole of Wakanda, Okoye, blows her own cover. And she blows her own cover by saying, I think it's something silly, but she makes a noise, basically, goes, "Ah," or tss, just makes a noise, and that's enough to like blow her cover. She's supposed to be the top general, and yeah, she undermines the whole situation. So as amazing as she is, she just kind of ruins everything. There's this big fight. That's probably how it's written in the film, on paper, in the script. Big fight happens, and Panther fails to grab Claw. So again, we just got this repeated. The whole film essentially is just like a series of failures on the part of Black Panther to really live up to his name. Like, I've read a couple of the comics. Like, the comics are not like this. They're just not like that. He just doesn't lose. He never loses. And in this scenario, like, he just loses constantly throughout the film. But he lets Claw slip through his fingers. Nikita and Okoye run off and just leave him. He's the king, but they leave him. They're going ahead. The sister has to save him with the backup car. And he tells his sister to not mind. This I found this interesting, actually. So his sister's all the way in Wakanda driving the vehicle. I just found it a little bit sinister. Like, they drive over throughout the scene where they're doing this chase. They end up driving over one of the villains, one of Claw's crew. And she runs over and she says, "What's that?" And he says, "Oh, don't mind. You've just killed someone." Like, she's just run someone over. So again, I get it's a film, but like, it's just the level of subliminal that's in there, and really what's trying to happen. I found the line quite funny. Okoye, and I think this is where it's trying to get you to let your guard down. The general saying, "Oh, so primitive," when they're firing guns at her, and the joke, if you're somebody who doesn't really identify with Africa in any shape or form, the joke is, isn't that ironic? She's the primitive one and she's calling them primitive. That's the underlying joke, which I don't particularly find funny, but yeah, it is what it is again. Then Claw destroys the cars. He destroys the car that the Okoye and Nikita are in, and they're saved. These two women, these two strong women, both spies, one's a spy while the other one's a general, they're saved by the CIA guy. Again, he pulls up and he saves them. And again, little throwaway line, he says to Okoye, "I'll throw the spear in the back." Anyway, so Black Panther eventually catches up with Claw, but again, his car is disintegrated, jumps off, manages to pull the wheel off the car, and he crashes, and he can't kill him because of the cameras. It can't happen. Even though Claw, and he does it a couple of times throughout the film, he calls them savages, just re-imprinting this thing again and again. But the CIA take him in for their own interest. They take him in for interrogation because Black Panther can't kill him in front of the camera. The world is watching, I think is one of the line that's used. So that's the end of that scene. Again, he's failed to do what he said he was going to do, which is either kill Claw, and he said he was going to kill Claw for his own reasons, but he also said to his friend he would either kill Claw or bring him back. But we cut to the interrogation scene. Now again, this isn't the most subliminal scene, but it's one of them. So they're basically in bed with the CIA at this point. So the king of Wakanda, the king of the most advanced country in Africa, he's in bed with the CIA at this point. They have control over the situation, and even as a king, as a superhero, basically you're still subject to their rules. They just get undermined the whole time. You say, "No, this is what we're going to do." So like, if you're somebody watching this film and you're trying to empower yourself, like, you're essentially still need to be aware, and this is what the film is trying to say, you still need to be aware that you're subject to the rules of the CIA, etc. Now he puts it down to diplomacy. This is exactly what Black Panther says to the general. You have to be diplomatic, and then he bugs the agent anyway. So he uses like a very, it sounds crazy in a way, but it is a very Western tactic. You don't really see these kind of tactics being originating from these countries, from Africa as a continent. You just don't see those practices really being there prior to being introduced by Western civilizations. And I don't think spying on someone is really an advancement. I think it's it's a sly technique, but again, that's a by the by. So he goes in, has a conversation with the CIA agent, and essentially just says, we've got more in common. Claw said, that's the first thing he says, "I'm much more your speed," is the words that he says to him. So I'm much more your speed. Why are you dealing with the Wakandans? Why are you dealing with those savages? We should be more on the same page. And then starts to explain more to the CIA what Wakanda really is, which is why at this point you probably, if you're somebody watching the film, why I don't really know what what about this film should have you rooting for either Wakanda as a nation or Black Panther? I don't. I really don't. Other than they've got the tradition, they've got the technology, it looks cool. Because he says about Wakanda, he says, like, nobody's really been there. And if you have been there, he says, I'm one of the few people to get out there. This is Claw speaking to the CIA agent. He said, if you do get out there, you're lucky. I got out of there, but most people don't. Most people that go there never escape alive. So he's essentially saying that they just kill people. Like, these are... So you're not really building any empathy for Wakanda or the nation or for anything they do for me as a viewer. You're just saying that people break into the country and they kill people that try and get out alive. And he said that essentially they have weapons of mass destruction. Because when the agent talks to him about Claw's weapon, which is this disintegrating tool, he says, oh, this is nothing. He said, this is just a bit of digging equipment that I've modified. He said, you should see all the real weapons that the Wakandans have got. And again, we get this back and forth of what Wakanda is, a third world country, they have nothing. And it's this polar extreme. It's like either Wakanda is represented throughout the film as being this society that have everything and they're selfish and they don't want to give anything to anyone, or they're a third world country and they have nothing to give anyway. It's this flip between the two, and I think that's the whole purpose of the film anyway, is to divide you down one route or another and not to see the holistic overall perspective of what's going on. But says that no outsider, let me go back to what Claw said to CIA, he said no outsider has ever gotten out alive, and it just highlights the fact that they're just killing people there. Black Panther then lies to the CIA agent when he comes out. He says, oh, your dad told the UN that a little bit of or most of the vibranium was stolen, but he's saying that you have more. And Black Panther just insinuates, oh, what would you rather believe, me or you'd believe the convicted criminal who's in there, who's actually right in saying what you're saying. And at this point in time, Killmonger breaks through the pack, steals Claw out of it, and we see again the CIA agent, who we know CIA is supposed to be a villain, really, in every film. If you were really portraying... I'm not talking about the individuals. Individuals are individuals, people are people. I'm sure there'll be hundreds of individual CIA agents out there who are truly trying to do good things. But as an entity, they are an evil entity. They should never be portrayed as anything other than the villains in every film. The CIA agent saves his ex, so he's the great person in this scenario. He's the person that's helped him out. And again, we see Black Panther suiting up. He's fully suited up this time, running after Killmonger, and he's somehow taken out by a regular gun. Right? He's still he's failed again. So he's not only failed to keep hold of Claw from a diplomatic perspective with the CIA agent, he's failed to physically keep hold of him, and then when attempting to go after Killmonger, he's shot with a regular gun, and that's enough to take him out. So yeah, Black Panther gets back and is hit by this thing of guilt, and says, okay, we can't let the CIA agent die, we're going to need to take him back to Wakanda. Now, they haven't really let anybody else into Wakanda. This is the whole idea of Wakanda being this isolated place. They haven't let anybody into Wakanda, and now they're letting somebody from the CIA in, whose job, and this is the dialogue that they have between Okoye and Nikita on the way back, is that, okay, now you're going to let this guy into Wakanda whose duty it is to respond to his job and tell everything that he ever sees to his government, and now you're going to let him into the borders. And the simple response is, I can't just let him die. Well, I again don't really get that. Do they not have some kind of mobile medical equipment that they can treat him on the ship? I don't know, but for the sense of the plot, yeah, whatever. So he comes back, but it just shows that he's got this negative relationship with all these other melanated black men around him, but then the first sign of trouble, he's managed to bring this CIA agent in who doesn't share the same background as him. So they take him in, and the sister says, oh, we've got another broken white boy to help, kind of, again, alluding to something that will take place later in the film, but this is not the first time. And then his clansman, Wakabi, ends up coming in, who understandably is very upset. Now, to me, Wakabi really represents, if you're a young revolutionary African man, or if you're African American, again, one of those two demographics, you will be the person that associates with this one. This is for the, those young revolutionaries where loyalty is all they have. And if someone gives you their promise of saying, look, I will do this, then you're expecting them to do it. And these are, that generation, the lost generation we see all over, the people young men that are going into gangs, going into tribal warfare, when really their efforts and energies need to be targeted and driven in another route for them to make a positive effect on their communities. But he's let down. He's let down by Black Panther and just kind of walks off. He said, your dad, the whole time I was under your dad, he said he was going to do something and he hasn't. And now I realise it's just going to be the same with you. It's representative of this dynamic of this, who T'Challa represents, and who the people that will identify with T'Challa, who are these upper middle class Africans, and then the disenfranchised, more rebellious Africans within Africa. This kind of plays out the real life dynamic that they have between the two of them. So again, interesting. He said it's just more the same, just like your father completely lets him down. And then we cut back to another Killmonger scene. Now, we've just seen Killmonger 2 moments ago helping Claw escape and showing his prowess, showing his ability to get the job done. We've seen Killmonger successfully complete 2 missions. He's completed the first mission with obtaining the vibranium with little to no negative effects, and then we've seen him still claw out of the clutches of the CIA and Black Panther comfortably. So we cut back to Killmonger with his 100% win rate at the minute, and he wants to go to Wakanda. They get into this disagreement, and he ends up killing not just his partner, let's just say his partner, his girlfriend, whoever you've associated with being his girlfriend, which I know there's a lot of controversy about because he killed a black woman. yeah, it didn't really kind of leave a good taste, I don't think, in anyone who watched the film's mouth. But kills her, ends up killing Claw, who again says, they're savages, just reiterates this point. I don't think anyone's really sympathising with the South African gent here at this point, because he just keeps calling them all savages, and says that he will be taken for an outsider, at which point he shows him his tag under his lip, which is the indication of him being a Wakandan, and kills Claw. So next we've got this scene, and this is the scene that kind of ties in everything. This scene and one other scene that really is another, to me, explains the esoteric nature of the film and the occult aspect of the film, is between Black Panther and the Medicine Man. So it cuts to this scene next between T'Challa and the Medicine Man, whose name is Zuri. So they're having this dialogue. So his father is highlighted by Njurubu, who is his uncle, who's the gentleman that got stopped at the beginning, who's the father of Killmonger. And he highlights, at this point in time, Zuri, the fact that what really happened at the beginning of the scene is that he was targeted, he was nearly shot at, and his father, T'Challa's father, T'Chaka, turned around and killed his uncle. Now, not only is that a really over-the-top response, and like if you actually see the scene, he knocks the gun out of his uncle's hand, who's just pointing it at Zuri, said he was going to kill him. He's already knocked it out of his hand, and then he follows it up by killing him. He didn't need to kill him, but he does. And then he lies. Not only did he say that he was targeted by him, he lies about Killmonger, the Medicine Man. Zuri lies about him, said he couldn't have possibly had a ring. It wasn't possible that he could have had that. To which T'Challa calls him out and says, you have to have secret. This is the king again, which shows his lack of leadership skills. It shows his lack of royalty, in the sense that he has to keep berating this guy to give him information that he should have anyway. He has to shout at him to get him to reveal everything that's happened. So after shouting at him, after acting in a really unkingly manner towards his Medicine Man Zuri, he eventually gets told the story. So he explains his uncle was on an assignment, and what was interesting is that he fell in love with somebody. So this character, the uncle's character, I think is representative of those Africans that leave Africa and go to other places throughout the world, America, wherever the case may be, and feel some sense of guilt, I suppose, for not being aware of what some of these other nations go through. Now, I've found out, again, from personal perspective, like, it's not taught within mainstream education within African countries that there was a slave kidnap. I don't really deal with the slave trade terminology. It wasn't a trade. No one really traded anything. Like, it's a slave kidnap and a people kidnap, a mass kidnap. They're not really taught about this. So when an African who's not familiar with this concept then interacts with somebody who is very familiar with it. I come from a Jamaican background. We were always taught, like, okay, so this is part of our history. When they have it highlighted to them, they feel one of two emotions. One, which could be potentially guilt, even though they don't really have anything to feel guilty about. I've met plenty of white people that don't feel guilty, so I don't know why an African would. But either guilt or the other perspective could be this kind of protective way of looking after their emotions by saying, oh, well, that wasn't me, and I had nothing to do with it. A response which I'm sure most people are familiar with if you've had a conversation around this topic with anyone. Some people say, oh no, but it had nothing to do with me. Slavery was X amount of time ago. What relevance does it have now? But yeah, the uncle really starts to highlight this. He was somebody who left Wakanda, left Africa for what Wakanda represents, went to America and started to really identify with their struggle. Like at this point, we see this flashback. He fell in love with an American lady and had a baby out there, which we then find out is obviously Killmonger. But he says he's observed for as long as he could. This is his actual dialogue to the father. He said that he's observed for as long as he could. So it's kind of showing this perspective of Wakanda, again representative of Africa, is aware of these other struggles but did nothing about it. Completely not true, but he then goes on to say their leaders have been assassinated, kind of harkening back obviously to Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. Their communities are flooded with drugs and guns. They're overly policed and incarcerated. And then he also, this is interesting, it kind of blurs the lines between Wakanda and Africa and people of the diaspora, because this is all over the planet. Our people suffer. Are we talking about Wakandans at this point, or are we talking about black people? Because that line gets completely blurred at this point. Because they don't have the tools to fight back. And this is what he's saying, kind of highlights this long-standing thing of the only way that we can ever resolve anything within not just Africa but within the diaspora is by physically fighting back. And he wants to overthrow the government and rule them. This is his perspective, and this is obviously the doctrine that we see perpetrated not just throughout Killmonger, but I think this is a very real issue within the communities of African America and the UK at large. I think these are real issues that are kind of, lots of people are feeling like maybe that is the course of action that might be necessary. I don't, but there we go. But his uncle was going to kill Zuri, the spy, but was killed by his dad. Even though he'd already disarmed them. So he spilled royal blood because of the spy. He spilled his brother's blood because of the spy. And then tells the spy not to say anything. And then not only did they just abandon the body, but they abandoned his nephew as well, because they had to maintain the lie. So this is the perspective that we're left with. Like, again, the subcontext of it is that the traditional African male is happy to turn his back on the African male who accepts and identifies with the struggle of the African American in the diaspora, even to the point of lying about it, even to the point of spilling his blood, even to the point of disassociating himself from his offspring, Killmonger in this very tangible case, but just to maintain the lie and to leave them high and dry, and it doesn't really matter anyway. That's a very dangerous and poisonous ideology to put within the melanated community, and it sows huge lines of dissent between the two. So that was particularly disturbing for me to analyse. But Zuri says to Black Panther, he said, we had to do this to maintain the lie, basically. We had to abandon your nephew, your cousin, your father's nephew, but to maintain the lie. And that's the end of that scene. Then we cut back to Killmonger again. So now we're finding out more and more about Killmonger. At this point, he's kind of looking less and less like a villain, even though he's already... He's like killed a woman, and he doesn't... He's not showing the character traits of a hero here, but we're already starting to try and identify. The film is trying to encourage us to identify with this character, but he turns up at the border and does what Black Panther couldn't do, and brings Claw to the border guard dead. And this ties back into what I said before when they were initially talking about Claw. Like, this was a big deal. Claw was never able to be obtained by T'Chaka. The whole time Black Panther's father was around, he was never able to get hold of Claw. But within a space of a couple of months, Killmonger was able to kill him and bring him on the doorstep to the border guard. The next scene after that, after identifying with the border guard, and obviously Okabe, who's just been snubbed by T'Challa at this point, is really resonating with what Killmonger is going through. And again, in real terms, how does this play out in real life? The revolutionary, young, angry, and understandably angry, but that's not the ultimate way to channel your energies, but understandably angry African American, and the equally young and angry, disappointed African, who's part of tribal war and part of this gang mentality that is prominent there also. They would probably find a common cause. In real life, they would probably find a common cause. Some of the young guys that you've got out in Chicago, LA, I only use them as prominent examples because they're the ones that are immediately come to mind and really relevant. They've got like the long dreaded culture, even in Newark, in New Jersey, like they've got this long dread culture. They identify with being dreadheaded, which Killmonger is in the film, again, a dreadhead. And then you've got within lots of different communities all around Africa, these young disenfranchised men that are part of gang cultures. Again, a lot of them have got dreaded hair. That might sound like a really superficial observation, but in terms of ideologies, I think in real life, they would probably find there's a lot of things that they would agree on, and a lot of things in terms of like the tangible actions that they would be happy to agree on. Let's go and do something about this. Let's take physical action on it. And again, I'll stress the point that I don't think that's not the ultimate solution to the issues that we're facing within our various communities. But next we've got the CIA agent. He wakes up now, so he's waking up. He's just having a great time. What I found really interesting is I laughed the first time I saw this in the cinema. I laughed, and I was in the film with predominantly Caucasian audience, but I've laughed and no one else did laugh. The CIA agent wakes up and she calls him a colonialist. Even though Wakanda's never been colonialized, which just interesting for me to look at. Small observation, but CIA agent says, "Where are we? How could I have been healed in a day?" To which Shuri, and again it kind of develops her character in her sense of not really caring about tradition. She says, "Oh, it's not by magic, it's by technology," because the CIA agent is implying that what is it, some kind of magic? Agent Ross is saying, is it some kind of magic? And it's not magic, it's technology. So here we are again prizing technology over everything else. Like nothing else is more important. Like Africa has got a very rich and diverse history, especially when it comes to healing, through herbs, through various different techniques. And again, for the most part, they would, unfortunately, by Western medicine standards, be associated with witch doctors and quote-unquote magic. And we prize technology over all else in the West. That's the religion of the West. But we see this message again perpetrated throughout this film to a predominantly melanated community that went to go and see these films, is that technology is always superseding magic, or what we would associate with being magic. You know, see, he wasn't healed by herbs and traditional medicines and the red heart shaped herb that is reserved for Black Panther alone. There aren't other similar herbs that they can use. No, he's healed by the vibranium, by the technology. And then the CIA agent starts to have a look around. So, he sees the magnetic levitation on the train. And the vibration being visible to what I found interesting as well, they had to deactivate the vibranium to travel at high speed. So it's almost at that point we like, I know vibranium is indicative of this difficult resource to obtain, and almost similar to unobtainium within Avatar. But at this point, it kind of lends itself to almost being like a plutonium-like substance, like it's that dangerous, like it's too volatile to be travelled at high speed, so they have to deactivate it. I just found that interesting. Then Suri, the young sister, and a CIA agent are called by the general to say Killmonger is there with Claw, which is, again, shows the three different perspectives. They first call him an outsider. They say he's an outsider. This is somebody who's supposed to represent the African American and the African American struggle. He's an outsider. And this is for the most part how a lot of African Americans would feel, or how it's told that they should feel when dealing with Africans, which I don't believe to be the case. There's definitely work that needs to be done in terms of the dialogue, but I don't think it's you would be classified as an outsider. Then they say, oh, he's a Wakandan. Again, representative, oh no, he's an African actually. Which, again, I empathise with a lot of African Americans not wanting to say out and out, I'm an African. They've kind of gone through, as a society as a whole, their own issues enough to want to be classified as their own individual group of people, which again is a separate conversation. But then it's finished off with no. The CIA agent says no, he's one of us. He's actually one of us. So that's how that scene ends. Cuts to the point of Black Panther and his ex, and boy, it sounds even worse reviewing this and going back through my notes on here. But what kind of king is this guy anyway? He starts to talk about his dad. He says, oh, you know, what kind of king or a man leaves a boy and his brother behind? And he's right in saying that. He's quite right in saying that, but then kind of undermines his father's legacy in front of this ex, his ex. I know they've got history, but you know, he's still undermining his father. He's saying my father's helped to create a bigger problem in the long run. Essentially, that's what he's saying, and reassured by his ex at that point in time that he can create his own path. So this is again the message that the traditional African is being given here. If you're associating with Black Panther, T'Challa, is that your father must have made plenty of mistakes and has made mistakes, but you can forge your own path, which again I can't wholeheartedly disagree with, but it's just the way that they are trying to push the perspective of it as well. He's then called by his sister and told that Killmonger is there, and the CIA agent basically gives him the rundown on Killmonger. So he's an MIT grad. So it's, again, prizing this education aspect of things. And he was part of the Navy SEALs. And then he went to Afghanistan. And then he got the name Killmonger by, I think he says something along the lines of he was racking up kills like it was a game or something like that. But then this is where the film really kind of peels back some of the layers and highlights really how the CIA operate in real life. They do these things. They says, oh, he becomes part of a JSOC ghost unit to disrupt and destabilize countries by assassination, etc. They do this stuff, or have done it, and I quite comfortably would say, yeah, they are still doing this kind of stuff. But then asks about the war dog tattoo, because that's another thing. So he has got a war dog tattoo, so they're aware that he still has the mark to be classified as someone who's associated with Wakanda. So that's the end of it. But they've still got all of this information about this Wakandan, about this African American. Who have they got it from? They've got it from the CIA agent. They've got it from the white CIA agent, who's really going to give them the information about who this person is, even though at this point, Black Panther knows who this guy is. He really does know who it is. But he, again, chooses to not give this information to anybody else, but because who can he trust? He hasn't told anybody else about this information. So now we move on to the throne room scene. And this, for me, is the scene that is where the real dialogue, this is the meat of the whole film, is summed up here in this conversation between Killmonger, representative of the African American, and T'Challa representative of the African, I suppose, to generalize. So he knows, at the beginning of the scene, Black Panther really knows, T'Challa knows who Killmonger is, but doesn't want to say anything. Now, Killmonger comes in and mocks the justice. He mocks the justice of the system there, saying that you weren't even able to obtain justice for Claw. And you could say rightfully so, because he didn't do anything and his father didn't do anything the whole time they were alive. He says, at that point, Black Panther doesn't even talk about Claw. Claw's gone out of the window all of a sudden. He doesn't even kind of say, all right, well, fair enough, don't undermine our justice, but thank you for bringing this war criminal who we've been looking for 20 plus years to us. No. He says, I know I would kill you. It's straight aggression back to Killmonger, saying, I would kill you, but I know who you are. And Killmonger says that you're living good. This is the conversation. This is the dialogue this is the spirit of the film. It's like the disenfranchised African American that doesn't necessarily have a direct interaction with an African might say something along these lines, and I think it highlights why everyone's associating himself with him. He said, you're living good up here, 2 billion people that look like us, but they don't have the resources they need. They're living hard. They don't have the resources they need. They don't have their weapons, basically the weapons to be set free. That's what he's implying. Now, Is that really what we want? Do we really want revolutionary young men supported by equally revolutionary dictators in Africa? No, we don't. But this is the message that the film is still trying to push. Black Panther says we don't wage war on the world for people who are not our own. So again, talking at cross purposes here. Are we talking about Wakandans? Or are we talking about black people? Because Killmonger's talking about people that look like us. That's a different conversation. It's a different dialogue. But then Killmonger agrees with this evolutionary theory, and then says the point, didn't life start here in Africa? Aren't all people our people? It shows this flip back and forth conversation that is really very tangible when we talk about Africa. Some people say, African as a country are taking all the resources, they're taking loads of aid from us, why are we still giving them aid? But on the flip side, could not survive, their economies simply couldn't survive if Africa stopped giving its resources to Western countries. So almost putting this burden on Africa as a continent that, okay, you should, because you're the birthplace of the earth, which I don't agree with anyway, but because you're the birthplace of the earth, you should support the whole entirety of the earth. This concept isn't sustainable at all anyway. In a real life situation, it's not sustainable. But the ideology is still pushed here again. And then to Black Panther's response to that is, I'm not king of all people. It just highlights a point that he's only there to save certain people. It's not a case of justice for him per se. It's a case of demographic, who's in his immediate vicinity. Now, this is a really key point. Is at this point in time, Killmonger starts to ask Black Panther. He says, "Ask me who I am. Ask me who I am." And this to me is almost kind of like representative of the young African American wanting to be acknowledged by not just Africa, but just acknowledged by other people who will say, actually, you are African men. You do have a history. You do have a lineage that goes back somewhere. And there's a lot of pain that goes in there. And I can't claim to understand all of it because I'm not an African American. But I think this is a conversation that's tried to be opened up. Killmonger's asking Black Panther to say who I am, just recognize who I am. And Black Panther, who's representative of the African, literally turns his back and refuses to do that. So eventually what happens is he continues to scream this out, recognize who I am, and one of the other members who are in the council room says, who are you? At which point he responds to say, yeah, I am the son of your uncle. I am your rightful. I am a rightful heir of the throne as well. I'm able to be down here. Now, interesting. Before he recognizes who I am, the sister jumps in and says and gives the CIA breakdown basically of who Eric is, and just regurgitates this back. So I've been told by the white agent who you are. This is who you are. This is who you really are. And Killmonger says, no, I'm not. I found my dad with Black Panther claws in his chest, and calls Black Panther's dad a murderer. Like this is again like representative of the deep conversation that needs to really be had on a personal level between people from Africa and African Americans and Jamaicans, people from the islands, like where my heritage is from. This is a conversation that really needs to be had. Like a lot of African Americans, a lot of people in Jamaica, a lot of people from the islands really feel like Africans sold us down the ship, and we still hold that level of pain. Like we still held back by the fact that Africa doesn't even acknowledge who we are. We're not getting any kind of pats on the back or special treatment or reparations. Like I've even heard it said that some people do want to go back to Africa. Some people from the diaspora do want to go back to Africa, but then they essentially want to treat the Africans the same way colonialists do. And so you give us resources, we deserve half of these resources. Give us these resources. Again, a very dangerous message that's being pushed there, you know. The mother tries to deny at this point in time that he is who he says he is, but Black Panther accepts it and just says, look, fine, I'll accept your challenge. You can have a go of trying to sit on the throne. And Killmonger says, look, I don't need anyone there. I just need you and me there, and that's it. Just a really interesting bit of dialogue. It says, just get me out of these chains. Just very much representative of the character that African Americans would want to agree with. And then we move on to the challenge at the waterfall. Killmonger makes a spear into a sword. I think it's an interesting nod to Shaka Zulu there. And then Killmonger starts to show off his scars from where he's gone through. He says, I've waited my entire moment and my entire life for this moment. I've travelled to America, I've travelled to Afghanistan, Iraq, even people from this continent. He's just showing that he's killed people from all of these melanated brown countries, basically, just to kill Black Panther. That's what he says, just to kill you and to take over. So they start having this fight. Again, because he's the weak character he is, Black Panther starts getting taken out. And he's only saved by the medicine man. And if he didn't save him, if the medicine man Zuri didn't save him, he would have been dead straight away anyway. And says, look, okay, I'm the one that killed your father, kill me instead. And he says, all right. Killmonger says, I'll kill you and him as well. So at this point of defeat, he starts to lord over him. He says, oh, is this your king? Is this the person who you're saying is going to lead you into the future? Is he supposed to protect you? I think this is the dangerous mentality. Like this is really some mentality of some African American Pan-Africans that want to move back to Africa, but then essentially want to dethrone whoever they feel like is the leader over there. I mean, we've seen this in real life with places like Liberia, where African Americans did go back, and we still had this elitist, separatist group of people that were essentially trying to treat the quote unquote indigenous Africans like they were cattle, and still trying to use this capitalist system. Again, a separate video, and I definitely will be doing a video on this as well, is how capitalism doesn't fit in with the Pan-African mindset. It just can't. It should be about sharing resources and being able to work collaboratively, but not this whole I'm gonna take the control over. Killmonger then throws Black Panther over and says, I'm your king now. I'm your king. And people start to leave crying. Obviously they're kind of upset about the situation. And then we transition into what I think is probably the best acted scene in the film between Lupita Nyong'o and I think what's her name, Dania, a lady who played Okoye, the general in it. The scene between those two, which is again looked very genuine. The ex basically wants Okoye to remain loyal to him. And if you're identifying yourself, if you're an older African American lady or older African lady identifying yourself, you see this dynamic again played out between the two characters they represent. So the general wants to remain loyal to tradition, and the things that make the country Wakanda, make that country great, and the spy essentially just wants to remain loyal to her heart. And we see these two different conversations play out. One says, the general Okoye says, I want to serve my country, I want to serve it, and Nikita's response to that is, I want to save my country. It's like these two different perspectives. And not that there's one in between the two. There definitely is. I think there is. You need to serve the people you're working with, but also you need to save them through doing that. It's not just one or the other. But just shows to me like them pitting again the younger female against the older female. You see these techniques highlighted by Willie Lynch for how to make a slave syndrome, and I just think this is just another way of doing it via propaganda, really kind of setting these dialogues up between people within the melanated community. So they have this argument, and then X goes, and who does she save again? She's saving the CIA agent. Like the CIA agent doesn't have a bad deal in the film, actually. Like he comes off looking like a pretty good guy. He's actually much more effective in the film than Black Panther is. If you see his win ratio, like he wins more. Like the winner in terms of the missions that they have, the person that comes out on top is Killmonger, then probably the CIA agent, and then Black Panther. But yeah, we then transition over into the Killmonger scene. Now this again, well acted, but has got a lot to kind of break down in it. Killmonger's vision. So you do see the sister crying over not being able to bury Black Panther, which again feeds into this whole scene that we're about to go into, because obviously Killmonger's father was not able to be buried either, so she's crying over not being able to bury T'Challa, when this is exactly what happened to Killmonger. So then Nikita arrives with the CIA agent. CIA agent is introduced as a friend again to the Queen Mother, and saying that they need to protect him and look after him. She says, look, the CIA agent protected me and looked after me, and then again he gets into this really positive standing where other people just wouldn't have, definitely not outsiders to Wakanda. But then the spy goes off to go and get the heart-shaped herb, which is where we see the Killmonger scene now of him in the plane room being dealt with and prepped to become Black Panther, or the new Black Panther. So we get the flashback of him with him as a child finding his dead father. So again, like the whole film really set up to empathize with Killmonger. I don't really see how we're supposed to empathize with this aloof king who just makes really poor decisions. There's no character development there either. But he opens the stash. Killmonger walks into the room that the initial scene is shot. He walks into, starts looking through and finding the Wakandan writings to find out about Wakanda. Like, so this is again representative of the African Americans' desire really to find out about Africa and really wants to know about it and have got a care about it. But they've got this mixed emotion of feeling hurt as well and partly betrayed. So he opens up the stash, and then the father character, Okoye, he jumps in. Not Okoye, the father, who is T'Chaka's brother and T'Challa's uncle, appears in this vision as his father as well, and says, look, I gave you a key one day. I was hoping that you would be able to use it, this key being the mark of the war dog that indicates that he is a Wakandan. He says, I hope you may be able to use it one day, but I fear that you may not be welcome. Like the African American will always be able to be acknowledged as an African when they go back to Africa, if not only because of their skin color, and not to mention the fact that they kind of share the aspect of the name, but that should be enough for them to be accepted back into Africa off the strength of that alone. And I'm sure in real life, in reality, they would be. But the message that's pushed throughout this film is that they wouldn't be. And indicated by the next line, says, I fear that you may not be welcome. And interestingly enough, a Killmonger at this point is being played by the boy. So we're seeing these questions of complete innocence, complete open emotion, raw emotion being played by the boy asking these questions. He's saying, Why? Why would I not be welcome? So the response he gets from his father is because they will say that you're lost. Obviously, you don't need to put a subcontext in there. African Americans have been lost from Africa in a number of ways, either spiritually, mentally, physically. They have been lost from there. And he says, but I'm right here, which again is that raw emotion, which is like African Americans do feel lost, but equally we're just across the other side of the ocean. We're still here, we still exist, but I'm here. And this was a interesting bit of dialogue, not interesting, but just a sneaky bit of dialogue. It says, no tears for me. That's the father's response back. So my brother killed me, he betrayed me, and again indicative of the wider picture of African Americans being betrayed by Africans, and this is the story that's promoted. No tears for me. And then we go back to Killmonger, which we see this very fatalistic, everybody dies around here, people just die around here, everybody will die, almost kind of showing that America has got just as a hard struggle as Africa, which in a number of ways it does. And again, I won't claim to know all the ins and outs of that, because I just simply don't. But yeah, just highlighting the fact that it says, but I'm right here, no tears for me, but everyone dies around here. And then at that point he says, look what I've done. The father says, look what I've done. I should have taken you back, and now we're abandoned here. So they were literally abandoned in the film. The body was left and the boy was left, and they were abandoned. But I think, again, it's just indicative of the way the African Americans do feel that they were left there. And even the father, who here in this circumstance is basically representative of the Black American slave that was kidnapped and taken over, and they were in America, not out of their own choice. And I'm sure there'll be lots of people in that generation now of African Americans like, oh, so why didn't we go home? But they did try to. Again, I've just mentioned Liberia and Sierra Leone, and there were lots of examples. And it's not as simple as that. I'm not saying that's the clear-cut answer and the way that things can be dealt with just overnight by a flip of a switch. But again, it's starting these kind of dialogues and these conversations in people's heads, to which Killmonger then replies, maybe your homies, maybe your people, maybe the Wakandans, they're the people that are actually lost, and maybe that's why they can't find us. And again, talking about a bit of a swap in the cinematic perspective. He swaps them from being the young boy asking these questions to then telling his dad as Michael B. Jordan, the mature Killmonger, saying, well, maybe your people are the ones that's really lost. We're not the lost ones. This is an interesting conversation I have with Africans and my wife in particular, which is that the diaspora do have a lot to bring to Africa, and we will have a lot to take back to Africa, with technical skills and information and many other resources, but we cannot think that we're going back to Africa to take over. That is a negative, harmful perspective to go back with, and one that will just ultimately lead to more trouble and not benefit the continent. But that's the end of the scene. So he comes out of the scene of, maybe your homies are the ones that are really lost. Tells the new medicine lady, who's a lady now, okay, get rid of the herbs. She doesn't want to burn the heart-shaped herb, and he chokes her out again. And we've just got really negative interactions between this character and the people that he's dealing with, his servants. Now he's subjugated them. He's just treating them like dirt. And they burn all the herbs. The spy, Nikita, sees this and steals a herb and runs off. And then we've got the throning scene. Really interesting camera shot. Starts upside down and the camera spins around as he's walking towards his dominion, which is almost, again, an indication that the whole situation's been flipped upside down. Don't need to be a cinematography grad to get that one. But then begins this really interesting speech again, which kind of feeds into the vision he's just had. He says, where I come from, namely LA, America, when black people started revolutions, they didn't have the firepower, and kind of really highlighting that as being the main issue for why there were failings in the civil rights movement. Ultimately, I don't think anyone could look back and say that the civil rights movement in America failed. They didn't fail. Yeah, maybe they had higher hopes and still do have high hopes, but you couldn't say it failed. There were some major reforms that took place, and it wouldn't have happened without the sacrifice of many of the African Americans that passed away at that point in time, were murdered at that point in time, and many that are still even alive to this day. So to imply that, okay, we could have done more, or could have done it just would have been a different situation. It would have been all out civil war, and it probably could have still resulted in there being civil war in America now if they had the firepower. Where was Wakanda? Where was Africa? Where was Africa in this scenario? We have spies. That's what there are spies all over. We have spies, and I know how the colonializers think, and we're gonna start over. That's his exact terminology. We're gonna start over, and now we're on top. So this is just highlighting again this perspective of, okay, as Africans or African Americans or people of the diaspora, all we need to do is go back to Africa, and then we can be the ones on top. Like, because we can think like a colonializer, we can use these techniques to be the ones on top. Like, that is so far from the reason of wanting to go back to Africa. It's unreal. It kind of defeats the whole point of even wanting to go back there. You want to move out of a system, not into a system that you can then replicate again. But again, just shows this mindset that's permeated throughout the film time and time again, of really trying to push this as being a good mindset to have, when it's not. It's a toxic mindset. The general is against this, again, as she would be, but who does he really get the support from? Is the border guard, who agrees and says, yeah, like, I think that would be basically a good idea. I'd rather be the colonialist than the colonialized, which is a very real conversation that these young members of different tribes and gangs throughout Africa will really think. Like, and again, I can't say whether they should or shouldn't think that way, but do I think it's going to end in a way that means that there's less conflict? Nah, if anything, there's going to be infinitely more. So that's the end of that scene. Then we cut to the scene of the Nikita, the Mama, Suri, and the CIA agent walking down. The spy Nikita, I don't know, maybe it's because they've built up this rapport over the time he saved their life, right? But then tells him what the herb does. No, she's not supposed to be telling anyone what the herb does. It's a secret herb. It's used for royalty. But this CIA agent who's going to go and give all their information back to the guard, he's the person that gets the information for some reason. Now, they're not sure. They say they're not sure if they should even trust Jabari. Interestingly enough, he's the guy they shouldn't trust, even though they've got a CIA agent with them. But they go to Jabari, who tells the CIA agent to shut up. I thought it was a bit cheap again with the ooh ooh ooh, the hooting like a gorilla again. He's a gorilla in the film, but just like is what it is. But he then actually finally does show. He does shut up, and the spy, who interestingly enough has been kind of quite flippant towards T'Challa the whole film, finally shows her differentiation to the white gorilla. She calms down and relaxes in front of him. Interesting, not sure what that implies, but yeah. But at that point, Njogo does do something honourable at this point in time, and takes him, Mbako takes him to Black Panther's grave and shows him that he is still alive. To which point they give him the purple herb that they've stolen out before it was burnt, and he has another vision, goes to see his dad. Now, again, another exposing scene. He goes and just tells his dad, you're wrong. And he says not just that his dad's wrong, but you're all wrong. All the ancestors are wrong. So those people who, in context of the film, are definitely wrong to kind of not expand beyond their borders to want to interact with anyone, but for wanting to hold on to their tradition, the things that make them, the thing that make them strong as a culture, like they're wrong for doing that. That's what he's implying there, which again I completely disagree with. But then after this dialogue says that now you might be able to wait here, kind of implying that all the ancestors, you were just happy just to die and stay here and be weak, but I need to go back and claim the throne. Goes back, and again, who updates him? The CIA agent. So again, who's he really getting his information from? The CIA. The whole time, the whole film's like, there's about two CIA agents. Basically, it's about the white CIA agent, Agent Ross, and it's about the black CIA agent who's Killmonger. All right, that's really what the film's about, taking over Africa. But CIA agent explains how King Munga has traveled before, how he's basically trained to destabilize countries, which again is a very real technique. So in an election year, they'd swoop in and kill somebody and take control of all the resources. Yeah, again, very exposing to what CIA actually do in real life. But then T'Challa talks about his family and says, "Oh, can they stay here? I want to go and sort the situation out." And the mum will stay, but everyone else, his sister and the spy, Nikita, say they want to help, and the CIA agent says, "Oh, he'll help. You haven't got that very many friends." But then Jabari says he won't help. The guy, to be fair, he has just saved his life, but then says he won't help, which again shows this tumultuous relationship that Black Panther has got with his fellow countrymen. Like, he just doesn't have any resonance with them whatsoever. He doesn't have any positive relationship with them whatsoever. So yeah, he ends up walking away. He agrees that they won't help, and we cut to the next scene. So next scene now we have Killmonger with the weapon caches, finally trying to get them out, and they're going to the UK, the USA, and Hong Kong. All places where colonialists either currently reside or have resided in the case of Hong Kong, but places that surely must empathise with the struggle that African Americans have been through and the liberation issues they've been through. But Black Panther hops up. I'm not sure exactly how he takes the ship out, but he takes the ship out anyway, the weapons ship out. And then we see Killmonger say the challenge is over, so he refuses to agree with the traditional way of dealing with things after he's taken over. He says, all that king stuff's over, which you've got to laugh at. Like, who's going to give up their kingship after that position? He doesn't really appreciate the tradition. We see that from the fact he burnt the heart-shaped herb anyway. But then the border tribe attack, and again, he's got no juice whatsoever. He's got no respect whatsoever as a king, even as the former king, with this border tribe whatsoever, and they're supposed to be friends. But yeah, so the border tribe attack Black Panther, and the general then attacks Killmonger. She said she's going to protect Wakanda, but now she sees that Black Panther's still alive. Nah, actually that goes out the window. So Black Panther then starts having the fight with the border tribe, and some of the general's female soldiers, bodyguards, have gone to help him, to the point where they have to call in Rhino support. The border tribe need help from there. Wakabi calls them in. And then the CIA agent is set up in the pilot seat by the sister Nikita. And we cut back to Killmonger killing a bodyguard. So again, he's kind of racking up the kills. I know this has been discussed of his killing of black women. Like, yeah, if you're identifying with this guy, it's probably not that healthy in reality. But yeah, the spy and Suri then set up the spaceship so the CIA agent can fly it and chase after and kill these other caches. And the sister and Suri and Nikita end up fighting Killmonger, start attacking him. And Black Panther eventually stops Killmonger just at the point where he's going to kill his sister. So it takes that to happen before he's funny, like, nah, not having it, I'm going to jump in. So they fall down the big pilot area, the big flight area, a hole in the ground, and fall down to where the railway tracks were, where the sister had pointed out earlier that they need to deactivate vibranium to transport it, otherwise it's volatile. And they start being able to have this fight now without the vibranium suits getting in the way. To which point Killmonger says, I don't need this suit to kill you, where he normally was supposed to feel safe and protected, he can't anymore. And T'Challa's response back, just saying, you just want to see us become like the people that you hate. Ironically enough, that is a interesting observation that really kind of highlights the undermining of the whole film. Is that, like, ironically, if you're an African American, Pan-African that are going to Africa and you want to take over resources and have this capitalism mind state, you are literally going to end up being like the people that you're trying to get away from and causing the same problem. So interesting. And then again, Killmonger's response back to that: Wakanda took away everything I ever loved. it just kind of shows this conversation again between in particular, African American diaspora and Africans. They kind of feel like everything they ever cared about was essentially taken away from them by Africa, by proxy. They still kind of feel like they were literally sold down the ship, and I know that's a very positive narrative. I just don't think it's as one-dimensional as that. I was never really taught that. I was taught, kind of white people went and stole them. And for the most part, I still think that is the case. Like, where Africans were sold by Africans, it's not the way that people think it is. It's not as clear cut and as dried, and it wasn't in the quantities that people thought it was. But again, that deserves a separate video in and of itself. But we then cut back to a scene of the CIA agent being really selfless. He's destroying these ships whilst this other ship is shooting at him. And I actually thought at this point, when I first time I watched the film, the CIA agent's going to die. And I thought, oh, fair enough. That's going to add a bit of heart to the film. Suffice it to say he doesn't, but still shows this really selfless nature of him, and being part of this organisation who is smarmy and insidious. I just see the portrayal of CIA here as way more favourable than it should be, but again, by the by. Then again, during this, the Jabari show up to help the mission because the border tribe is starting to get in the better of the general's women. The Jabari show up and eventually, just at the right time, start attacking the border tribe. And the CIA agent, he's the one who really actually saves the wider problem, the bigger problem. Yeah, we've got this internal problem within Wakanda, like a civil war and a king fighting king, but really, like, he stops these weapons of mass destruction from going out. So he got a better win then. He got a better win overall than Black Panther does in the whole film. Then the border guard eventually submits to the general. I mean, they're in love. They've got this dialogue, which again I found really weird, because you've got this older, not she looks old, but you got this older lady in the film basically acting like a cougar with this younger guy, and it's just a weird relationship. But yeah, she defaults to him, and eventually we get to the final scene of Black Panther killing Killmonger, and he says, "Oh, good move," but it's a bit of a hollow victory after everything that's happened throughout the film and all of the losses, and the fact that we're empathising with Killmonger this much by the time we reach this point. When Black Panther finally kills him, it's almost like a hollow victory anyway. And of course at that moment it just switches, the whole perspective of it switches. Killmonger becomes very emotional, and he almost turns to like Eric Stevenson, the character he really is. He said, my dad said he wanted to show me Wakanda, I wanted to see it. So then T'Challa takes him up to see the sunset, and they have this moment of saying, "Oh, it's beautiful here." And then we get this bit of dialogue that's being posted everywhere at the moment of his response, where Panther says, we could heal you, maybe we could do something with you, and Killmonger says, "Why? So you can lock me up? Nah, just bury me in the ocean with my ancestors who jumped off the slave ships because they knew death was better than bondage." Yeah, interesting statement, right? And again, from a script perspective, sounds great. And to be honest, the first time I watched it, it had some impact with me. It's like, oh wow, that is really interesting. But for one, from a technical perspective, like, he's just picking and choosing who his ancestors are. Like, so you're identifying with the fact that you were born in America, so you clearly they weren't your ancestors, not directly anyway. They definitely weren't genealogy-wise your ancestors, because they died. So they didn't reach America for you to be from that gene pool. But I just see this as quite wishy-washy. We, within the community of people that care about Africa as a continent, need to really understand where we stand. That's very important. We need to really understand what is our heritage, what cultural practices do we agree with, what ones don't we agree with. People are always going to be at cross purposes at some point, but to be this wishy-washy, like, I think I've heard it said by one review, and I have checked out quite a few reviews on Black Panther, that one person said that, those people that just turned up the first time in like bought a dashiki just to go and watch Black Panther, you're just the most ignorant people. And that's a very sweeping statement. I'm not saying ignorant across the board, but maybe ignorant on the topic of Africa. Potentially you are. If you weren't really ever thinking about wearing a dashiki, but then because Disney decided to put out a film that was remotely about Africa, you wanted to go and buy a dashiki, then yeah, maybe you are a bit ignorant on the topic, and it's a wider subject. There are more in-depth dialogues that need to be had essentially about it. But that's the way the film ends, and essentially it's like, again, who's got the real hard hitting line there? Killmonger. So this is the film really is about his journey, and as I said, as a character, he develops much more as a character than we ever see T'Challa growing through. So we cut back to the scene then of towards the end now, Black Panther and Nikita. He's the king again. And basically starts begging Nikita to stay again, and she eventually just agrees and says, all right, cool, I'll stay, I will. And he convinces her to stay by saying, I might be able to find some kind of a job for you to do. And then we cut back again to where the film started, essentially, which is back in LA again, which is where the first major scene took place. And Black Panther is saying, this is where our father killed our uncle. This site here, yeah, that's the way you'd break it down to your sister. This is where our father killed our uncle, and says that we're going to have a community outreach program. And this is how he's managed to convince Nikita to saying that, okay, you can still do what you want basically, but you'll operate out of this outreach center, and says that his sister will deal with the technology exchange. Again, the depiction of the African American young boys there saying, oh, looks like a spaceship Bugatti, when they reveal the spaceship that they've travelled to that location in. They say, it looks like a spaceship Bugatti, like maybe we'd strip it down and take it and sell parts off. Like, again, I know that's probably accurate in some cases, but again, let's put our best foot forward whenever we're kind of putting out these films. Like, there will be a lot of people that went to watch this film that will just eat it up. Like, if you don't really have a hat in the ring, i.e. you're from a different cultural background or even genealogy, a different background, you'll just watch it and just think, oh, that's the way things are. And I don't really feel like Africans or African Americans per se, other than being shown in the positions of power, which, what does that really mean? Like, anyone can be in a position of power. It's not really shown. Neither group is really shown that favourably in it. After watching and really breaking it down, I just can't see it. Yeah, from a technical perspective, as I said, costumes look good and visually it's an interesting film to watch, but it doesn't really you don't come out the other side of it feeling empowered, unless it's empowered for the wrong reasons. Unless you feel empowered because you identify with Killmonger and want to overthrow a government, it's like, that's not the long-term solution. That's exactly what police want in America. That's exactly what armies want all around the world. They want these small pockets of revolution to blow up, so they've got a reason to kill people, to lock people up. That's exactly what happened with the Black Panthers, and that's exactly what happens with a lot of these revolutionary groups. They want them to pop up in small controlled pockets, so people can be identified, eliminated and suppressed. So that's my take on it. And then we've got the after credit scene. So we've got Black Panther and his spy girlfriend and the general. They're all going to the UN, and again they're going to appeal to the UN and basically say, oh, we're going to give out resources, we're finally going to, so everything that he stood for at the beginning, everything his dad did, he's just gone 360, and that's his character arc. That's his whole character arc, is Black Panther didn't care about giving out resources, and at the end he does want to give out resources. So again, quite paper thin. I think it's only meant to be that because it sets up probably for the next film that they're going to put out, Infinity War, but it just doesn't really do anything in terms of a character development. It just doesn't. And then of course the final scene, there were two post-credit cutscenes where the Winter Soldier Bucky pops up, and this is the other white boy that Suri was talking about that they managed to help and look after, who of course is what? He's basically a Manchurian candidate. So the two people the three people that have ever been to Wakanda and have ever been able to escape have been white people. There's been Claw, although he's tortured, he managed to escape. Has been the CIA agent, and has been Bucky. So that's the track record of people that have been to Wakanda and been able to leave so far. Like, it's just, I think it really just kind of shows where the film's truly at. And my kind of working theory is whatever the film finishes on, whatever the final frame of any film is, that's the message that they're trying to really promote, the first frame and the last frame. And the last frame finishes again with Bucky. So for all those people out there saying, this does a lot for black empowerment. Yeah, I can't say that. Even Barack Obama, for all his failings, and again, I could go off on a tangent about this, for all his failings, like, people seeing him as a president, that did a lot for different people mentally, for their social standing, for their individual self-worth. So I think there may be people out there that this will do something similar for as well. But overall, the kind of insidious nature of it, who it leaves people leaving out of the cinema identifying with. Like, as I said, most people that leave out there identifying with Black Panther will be from this historical, traditional background of an African. So you will be walking out of the cinema feeling like a castrated king that Black Panther was, who just wants to use diplomacy, and your best friend is a CIA agent. Or you could be a Killmonger, who essentially is an African American who is revolutionized, is radicalized, is used by the CIA, because let's not forget he was a CIA agent and worked for them, and then eventually gets the short end of the stick anyway and gets killed because you could never take that position. Or you could be identifying with the spy, Nikita, who again just wants to overthrow her government, doesn't really appreciate the things that are traditional about where they're from, and just wants everyone to be joined in together. Could be identifying with Okoye, who's the general, who again has these really traditional values, but ultimately kind of is not able to inherit her full womanhood, in the sense that she's trying to go out with this young boy, Wakabi, part of the border tribe, and it's never really clear what their relationship is. It seems like not platonic, but they're not in a real tangible relationship that you can see. The CIA agent just gets a pass. So if you're in there as a Caucasian person or any other person, you could say, oh, let's see, well, he's actually a really good guy. Although he's CIA, he helped them out the whole time, and he's the one that actually stopped the plan. Wakabi, again, the border agent, he kind of almost stabs. He stabs Black Panther in the back. But if you're a young revolutionary black African, you might find yourself identifying with him. The younger sister, quite similarly to Nikita Lupita's character, very technologically driven, but again, just this huge disdain for culture and tradition, Again, that's just disturbing to see that is something that's being pushed so much. Like, in one breath, we're really trying to appreciate Africa and African heritage, all under the brand of calling it Wakanda, by the way. No one's actually going to be able to travel to Wakanda. But using that as a pretext to talk about Africa without directly talking about it, saying, oh, these things are great about Africa, whilst at the same time undermining the very cultural principles that it's founded upon. Or potentially people identifying with the Okoye character, who is part of the Jaribu, and Jabari, who are part of the Jabari tribe, and essentially they represent the traditional African mindset of the strong African traditional male. But again, does he end up coming out on top? No. So yeah, can I say that anyone really walks away from this film feeling empowered? And I think the one person might be the fatal hero in some ways, which is Killmonger or the CIA agent. But I don't think anyone who's really identifying with Black Panther should feel that strong. So yeah, that is my breakdown of it. And I know I've missed a few things that I probably could and I might touch on as I'm going to do the follow-up video about the cast and how that's played out in real life. But I hope that kind of touches upon some areas that other people haven't spoken about so far. And Yeah, if you obviously like it, subscribe, and there will be more content that we're going to start uploading about not just this, but Pan African subjects and other topics that I just really feel are necessary to touch upon and discuss. But yeah, please comment, like, conversations that you want to start. This is all about dialogue. Then please do. All right, take care.